We begin this evening's program with a talk on the historical perspective of 23rd March by Dr. Mahmood Hussain, Vice Chancellor of Karachi University.
Pakistan came into being because at a certain stage in their history, the Muslim people of the Indo-Pakistan subcontinent decided to establish a state of their own. This they did because they felt that through it alone they could perpetuate their identity as a distinct people. In other words, Islam created national feeling amongst the Indo-Muslim population, and the Indo-Muslim nationalism created Pakistan. The consciousness that they were a people separate from the Hindus is as old as the Muslim connection with the subcontinent. Yet, when during the Pakistan movement one heard about the Muslims being a separate nation, doubts were expressed both in India and abroad regarding this claim. To the people abroad, it was incomprehensible that a people should claim nationhood on the basis of religion. Were not, after all, most Western nations made up of the followers of several religious denominations? So they argued. Why should not, then, the Hindus and Muslims of India also live happily as a single nation? In India, some of the greatest men of recent history had no comprehension of the Muslim claim to nationhood. Leaving aside narrow-minded Hindu communalists, the Mahasabhites and young Sanghis, for instance, even men of the stature of Mr. Gandhi and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru did not understand how Muslims could claim to be a nation. In his correspondence with Quaid-e-Azam, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Mr. Gandhi said, "I find no parallel in history of a body of converts and their descendants claiming to be a nation apart from the parent stock." And Pandit Nehru expressed himself even more strongly in his autobiography when he said, "The Muslim nation in India, a nation within a nation, and not even compact, but vague, spread out, indeterminate." Politically, the idea is absurd. Economically, it is fantastic. It is hardly worth considering. The idea of a Muslim nation, the figment of a few imaginations only. Unquote. For most people who had known only one kind of nationalism as had developed in Europe and North America, it was really not easy to appreciate the Muslim claim to nationhood. For the British statesmen, even if on occasions they had exploited Hindu-Muslim differences to their own advantage, the unity of India was their greatest achievement, and therefore they were not well inclined towards a movement that aimed at the division of the country. The military leaders in Britain in particular thought of defense of the subcontinent in depth, which they felt would be greatly jeopardized through its division. The Hindu economists came forward with the theory that Pakistan would not be economically viable. But the main objection raised by the opponents of Pakistan was, how could a religious community put forward a claim to nationhood? But these objections would not look as weighty as they look at first sight if one were to have a clear idea of the character of Islam in general and the role it has played in the history of India in particular. As to the general character of Islam, Islam is obviously not a religion in the ordinary and restricted sense of the word. It is a way of life. The Muslims who came to India and spread their creed in the subcontinent had ideas of their own, not only about God, the Prophet, and the book, which were very different from the religious ideas prevalent amongst the Hindus, but they also brought with them a different social system. Unity of God and equality of man were the ideas which were preached by them. The students of early Islam are well aware that Islam had in the very beginning of its career created a social organism known as the Ummah, a community of believers. Islam aimed at creating not only good individuals but also a good community with a mission, and the Prophet Islam was not only a spiritual guide of the Muslims but the founder of the Islamic state at Medina. Islam, which had its beginning in Arabia in the 7th century, appeared on the Indian scene early in the 8th century. The first Muslim expedition dates from 711. The whole story of the conquest is a thrilling chapter in military history. But this victory would not have been easy without the social discontent which prevailed in the country. At that time, for the Buddhists, not yet quite eliminated in Sindh, and for the lower castes, Islam came as a deliverer and was indeed welcomed as such. With the coming of Muslims through a good deal of cultural give and take started taking place, yet the identity of the Muslims was a recognized fact even during this early period. The Chachnama bears it out. And when further expeditions took place from Central Asia and Afghanistan and further expansion of Islam materialized, the separate existence of the Muslims, Al-Biruni's book, Kitab al-Hind, is a witness to it. Whereas during these early centuries, the Indian provinces that had come under Muslim rule had been administered as parts of a universal state, the Islamic Khilafat, with its headquarters in Damascus and later Baghdad, in 1206 was founded an Indo-Muslim state in Delhi, and with the founding of the Indo-Muslim kingdom, the Sultanate, the Muslim people of the subcontinent were now identified with this new state. As a result of several centuries of contact and the process of conversion, this Indo-Muslim people became somewhat distinct from the Muslims of the other parts of the world, but nevertheless it remained even more distinct from the Hindu inhabitants of the region. It was different from the Hindu population in beliefs, social customs, and the manner of living. The differences between the Muslims and the Hindus were not only comparable, but even more profound than the differences that can be noticed amongst the neighboring peoples of Europe. The Hindus and Muslims actually represented two ways of life. Their religious festivals and social ceremonials were altogether different. Food, drink, and dress were different. The customs and ceremonies connected with birth, marriage, and death were markedly different. The law regarding marriage, divorce, and inheritance was not the same. The Muslim architecture could be recognized by its special features from a distance. The social life of one was determined by caste, of the other by the principle of the equality of man. Above all, the historical traditions and symbols separated them. The heroes of Muslims were the villains of the Hindus, and vice versa. The ideals and values of the two differed. The international outlook of the Muslims was a marked contrast to the insularity of the Hindus. Thus, their different ways of life and historical memories had given to the Muslims a feeling of oneness and separateness. The feeling was not based so much on territory or race, rather it was based on historical traditions, culture, and above all faith. Its basis was Islam as applied to the situation of the Muslims in the subcontinent. Hinduism is well known for its capacity to absorb other religions and civilizations. It has, however, failed in the case of Islam. Obviously because not only Islam was so different from Hinduism, but it was also conscious of it. Yet there were Muslims in history who tried their best to bring Hinduism and Islam nearer to each other. Only these attempts did not succeed. However, while the Muslims were rulers of the subcontinent, they did not think in terms of division and establishing a state of their own, for it was not necessary. It was only after the coming of the British, and actually after several generations of British rule, when the British started introducing parliamentary institutions in however rudimentary a form, that the Muslims began to think in terms of a state of their own. They did not arrive at this idea at one stroke. For a very long time they thought in terms of safeguards only. Sir Syed, who appeared on the scene to take up Muslim leadership after 1857, had already recognized that India was not a homogeneous but a multinational country. That is why he had questioned the national character of the Indian National Congress, since, according to him, there was no Indian nation. For the same reason he questioned the system of election, pure and simple, which according to him could not be safely adopted, since the larger community would totally override the interests of the smaller. He also could not visualize that from one united India, if the British were to withdraw, the Hindus and Muslims could rule together. Thus already the grand old man had visualized the future shape of things and given the guidelines of conduct to his people. When after the coming of liberals into power in England in 1905, political and constitutional reforms seemed to be in the offing, Muslims demanded separate electorates, and the Muslim League was founded in 1906. The League adopted self-government as its goal in 1913 and tried to work out a basis of cooperation with the Indian National Congress to achieve this goal. The high water mark of League Congress understanding was reached in 1916 with the Lucknow Pact, the architect of which was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Hindus and Muslims started putting forward common demands and cooperated during the Khilafat movement after the First World War. Muslims were under the impression that they would be able to find an honorable place in a free India, but they came to have bitter experience, and so they started thinking of alternative solutions to their problem. They took up the position that they would cooperate with the Hindus only if they could be assured of their honorable position befitting a people 100 million strong and with the kind of past it had had in India. But only when they felt that even moderate safeguards were not forthcoming, they thought of a separate homeland. The schemes of division had been dropped, hints of division of India had been dropped by Muslims as well as non-Muslims over a number of years. Abdul Halim Sharar, the famous novelist, Sardar Muhammad Gul Khan of the Northwest Frontier Province, Abdul Qadir Bilgrami from amongst the Muslims, Lala Lajpat Rai from amongst the Hindus, and John Bright, the famous orator, Theodore Morrison and Lovett Fraser were amongst those who had put forward such ideas. But as a regular proposal, it came from Iqbal in 1930 and from Chaudhry Rahmat Ali shortly thereafter. Schemes of cultural division were also propounded, one by Dr. Sayyid Abdul Latif of Hyderabad, another by Dr. Sayyid Zafrul Hassan and Dr. Afzal Hussain Qadri of Aligarh. Yet another scheme about the confederation was presented by Sir Sikandar Hayat Khan. However, for quite some time, Muslims as a people did not show any particular inclination towards this idea. Quaid-e-Azam, who had a nationalist background, did not adopt it as his goal for a long time. Gradually, however, Muslim leadership became thoroughly disillusioned. Quaid-e-Azam himself, who had worked for Hindu-Muslim unity throughout his life and had been described by the Hindus themselves as ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity, became thoroughly disillusioned as a result of the working of the Congress governments formed in 7 provinces in 1937. In canvassing the Quaid, Iqbal played an important part as the correspondence between the two indicates. The Quaid now came to the conclusion that for Muslims there was no option but to claim a state of their own in the subcontinent on the basis of the two-nation theory. Once he adopted the idea of Pakistan, he gave his entire soul and body to this movement. In March 1940, on this very day, the 23rd of the month, Pakistan became the creed of the Muslim League, and with the passing of the Pakistan resolution at Lahore, and when this resolution was adopted, it became not only an essential part of the policy of a political organization, but also the supreme goal of the Muslim people. It was not only the commitment on the part of a political organization, but the ideal and ambition of a whole people. It was taken up most earnestly, and within 7 years, the miraculous had happened. Pakistan had emerged as a state.